The morning my lawyer set a certified check for $4,200,000 on my kitchen table, I watched my two daughters' faces go completely still. Not the kind of still that comes from joy or surprise. The kind that comes from shame. The kind a person wears when they realize, all at once, exactly who they are. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a cruel woman. I am not vindictive. I spent 41 years raising 3 daughters, baking birthday cakes from scratch, driving to every school play and every soccer game and every late-night hospital visit. I loved those girls the way only a mother can love completely, without condition, without asking for anything back. But love, I have learned, is not always returned the way it is given. My husband passed on a Tuesday in November, 14 months before any of this happened. Coronary. He was there in the morning and gone by afternoon, just like that, the way men like him go quietly, without warning, without giving you the chance to say everything you needed to say. His name was Gerald. He worked hard his entire life, built a small commercial real estate business from nothing, and left behind more than most people ever see. But the money was not the point. The point was that I was 67 years old, standing in a house that suddenly felt like it belonged to a stranger, and I needed my children. My oldest, Diane, lives in a suburb of Atlanta with her husband, who is a cardiologist. They have a house with a pool and a wine cellar and 2 cars that cost more than most people's first homes. She calls herself an interior decorator, though from what I can see, the decorating is mostly shopping. She is not unkind exactly. She is just the kind of person who is always slightly too busy to be present. My middle daughter, Sandra, lives in Charlotte with her husband, who runs a logistics company. They travel frequently, send postcards from places I have only read about, and talk about their investment portfolio the way people used to talk about their gardens. Sandra is sharp and efficient and organized, and she loves me, I believe, the way you love a piece of furniture that has always been in the house comfortably, without really thinking about it. My youngest, Rachel, married a man named Daniel when she was 26. Daniel grew up in Mooresville, North Carolina. His father was a plumber, and his mother worked the register at a grocery store for 30 years. Daniel himself works in building maintenance at an elementary school. He fixes boilers and patches leaky roofs, and sometimes reads to the kindergartners on his lunch break because, as he once told me, somebody has to. They live in a small house 2 towns over from me with their daughter Lily, who just turned 4 and has her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubbornness. When Gerald died, both Diane and Sandra flew in for the funeral. They were appropriate in their grief. They said the right things. They helped with arrangements. But within a week, they were both gone, back to their pools and their portfolios, and I was alone in that house with nothing but the sound of the refrigerator and Gerald's reading glasses still sitting on the nightstand. Rachel and Daniel drove over every week. Sometimes twice. Daniel fixed the gutter that had been pulling away from the roofline since September. Rachel brought soups and casseroles and sat with me at the kitchen table for hours, not always talking, just sitting, the way people used to know how to do. The idea came to me slowly. It came the way most important ideas come. Not all at once, but in pieces, over time. Assembling itself while I wasn't looking, I had been hearing things, small things, at first. Diane mentioning the house, how it was too big for me now, how it might be worth thinking about. Sandra asking, over the phone, whether I had spoken with the estate attorney yet, whether everything was sorted out. Questions about Gerald's business, about accounts, about what exactly the assets looked like, always framed with concern, always wrapped in the language of caring. But underneath the language, there was something else. Something that had a shape I did not want to name. I spoke to my own attorney, a man named Curtis who had handled Gerald's affairs for 20 years. I told him what I was thinking. He was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret," he said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I told him I was sure. What I did was not complicated. I withdrew from the accounts that my daughters knew about. I had Curtis quietly transfer assets into a new structure they had no visibility into. Then I called Diane, and then I called Sandra, and I told them both the same thing, that there had been a problem, that an audit had revealed irregularities in Gerald's business records from years back, that the estate was frozen pending investigation, that I had lost access to almost everything. I told them I was going to need help. I did not tell Rachel anything. I needed at least one person in my life who was responding to the real me, not a version of me filtered through the news of what I did or did not have. I packed a single bag. I called Curtis and told him where I would be and when I expected to need him. Diane's house is at the end of a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood where every lawn is the same length and every mailbox matches the trim on the front door. I parked my 12-year-old Buick at the curb because I did not want her to see it in the driveway before I knocked. I had dressed plainly, an old coat, flat shoes. I looked like what I was pretending to be a woman who had just lost everything and did not entirely know what to do next. She answered the door in exercise clothes, her hair pulled back, her expression one of vague surprise. "Mom," she said. "I thought you were coming Thursday." "I needed to come earlier," I said. "I needed to see you." She let me in. The house smelled like candles, something expensive, something designed to smell like a forest it had never been near. We sat in the kitchen. She made tea, though I noticed she checked her phone twice while the water was heating. I told her again what I had told her on the phone. I told her the situation was worse than I had initially understood, that the attorney was saying it could be years before anything was resolved, that I had maybe $300 in an account that was not frozen and I did not know what I was going to do about the house. She listened. She nodded. She said the words, "I'm so sorry," more than once in ways that felt like punctuation rather than feeling. Then she said, "Well, I think the most practical thing is probably to sell the house. That's not tied up in the estate, is it? The house itself?" I said I wasn't sure yet. She said that maybe I should look into senior living communities. She said there were some very nice ones. She had looked into them, actually. There was one in Asheville that was supposed to be lovely, very active community, lots of amenities. I asked her if I could stay with her, just for a few weeks, until things were clearer. The expression that crossed her face lasted less than a second. She was good at controlling it, but I saw it. She talked about the guest room, about how her husband's mother was potentially coming to visit in the spring, about how the kids were on different schedules now and the house was actually more chaotic than it seemed. She talked about all of these things, and then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "Mom, I just think it might be better for you to be somewhere you have your own space and your own routine." She wrote me a check for $200 before I left. She said she wished she could do more. But things were a little tight right now with the renovation they had started. I sat in my car at the end of her cul-de-sac and looked at the check. The ink was still wet. I folded it in half and put it in my coat pocket, and I drove north. Sandra lives in a newer part of Charlotte, in a townhouse that is sleek and angular in the way that things designed to impress tend to be. She was expecting me. I had called ahead, same story, same details. She met me at the door with a hug that was genuine but brief. We sat in her living room, which has no comfortable chairs, only furniture that looks comfortable in photographs. Sandra is direct. I have always appreciated this about her, even when I did not like what the directness delivered. She did not circle the subject. She laid it out for me plainly, the way she would lay out a business problem that needed a logical solution. She said she and her husband had talked about it. She said the situation was complicated because they had a lot of their own financial commitments. Right now, they were in the middle of expanding the business. They had just refinanced. The timing was genuinely terrible. She said she wanted to help, But she needed to be honest with me that her version of help was probably not what I was hoping for. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a printed list of resources: senior assistance programs, local nonprofits, a website for subsidized housing applications. It was thorough. It was researched. It was the most organized rejection I have ever received. She walked me to the door. She hugged me again, this time a little tighter, and she said, "Mom, you're strong. You always figure things out. You'll get through this." I drove to a gas station 3 blocks away and sat in the parking lot for a while. I am not going to tell you I did not cry. I cried. Not because I was surprised, exactly. I think some part of me had known, the way you know things you don't want to know, had known for a while that something had shifted in my oldest 2 girls, that the world they had built for themselves had gradually become more important to them than the world that had built them. But knowing a thing and having it confirmed are 2 very different experiences. The confirmation takes something out of you. I drove to Rachel's house. I had not intended to go that night. My plan had been to spend another day in Charlotte, to give the weight of the situation time to settle before I appeared at Rachel's door and risked not being able to hold myself together. But I was tired in a way that went past the body, and the only place I wanted to be was somewhere that felt like home. Rachel answered the door in her pajamas. It was a little past 8. Lily was supposed to be in bed, but she came barreling down the hallway anyway when she heard my voice. And she wrapped herself around my legs and called me Grandma Maggie the way she always does. And I had to breathe very carefully to keep my face from doing something that would require explanation. Rachel looked at me the way mothers look at their children, and children look at their mothers when something is wrong. That particular look that doesn't ask a question because it already knows. "Come inside," she said. That was all. I sat at their kitchen table, which is small and slightly unsteady on one leg, and has a ring stain on the surface from a plant that sat there years before they moved in. I have eaten more meaningful meals at that table than at any other surface I have sat at in my life. Rachel made hot chocolate. Not from a packet, she melted actual chocolate into warm milk the way I used to do when she was small, and I watched her do it with my hands wrapped around the mug she had already set in front of me. I told her the same story I had told her sisters. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say, "That must be hard," or "What a difficult situation," or any of the things people say when they are processing information rather than responding to a person. She put down the wooden spoon and she looked at me and she said, "Okay, you're staying here." I said I didn't want to put them in a difficult position. She said, "Mom, stop it." Daniel came downstairs about 20 minutes later. He had been giving Lily her second attempt at bedtime. He came into the kitchen and saw me, and the expression on his face was so uncomplicated, so simply glad that I was there, that I had to look away for a second. He said, "Margaret, I'm going to put clean sheets on the bed in Lily's room. She can sleep with us tonight. She'll be thrilled about it. Don't argue with me." I said I could take the couch. He said, "You're not sleeping on our couch. Please don't make this into something." The way he said it, not unkindly, not with any performance of generosity, just matter-of-factly, as though it were the only reasonable response, and all other options were simply off the table. I cannot explain what that did to something in my chest. I stayed. I was there 4 days. In those 4 days, I learned things about Rachel and Daniel's life that I had known abstractly, but had not fully understood. I knew they did not have much, but I had not fully absorbed what not much looks like from the inside. Daniel gets up at 5:30 every morning. He packs his own lunch, because buying lunch adds up over a year. He drives a truck with 200,000 miles on it, and a crack in the windshield he hasn't fixed yet because it's not on the driver's side, and therefore not technically urgent. He coaches Lily's soccer team on Saturdays because the league needed a coach and he was there. He reads to her every night from a collection of books they buy at library sales for $0.25 each. On the second day, I overheard him on the phone with his brother. He didn't know I could hear. He was in the hallway outside the bathroom, speaking quietly, and I heard him say, "I need to see if I can borrow maybe 500 from you until the end of the month. Rachel's mom is going through something, and I want to make sure we've got enough to cover groceries and whatever else she might need." He said it simply, without complaint, without any sense that he was doing something extraordinary. His brother said yes. On the third evening, Rachel told me quietly that Daniel had sold some tools from his garage workshop, a set of woodworking equipment he had been collecting for years, piece by piece, things he bought secondhand and refurbished himself. He had been planning to teach himself carpentry. He had sold most of it that afternoon to a man who came and loaded it into the back of a pickup truck while I was resting. I said, "Rachel, he shouldn't have done that." She said, "Try telling him that." That evening, Daniel made dinner a big pot of chicken and dumplings from scratch, the kind that takes 2 hours and makes the whole house smell like warmth. We sat at that unsteady little table, all four of us, Lily in her booster seat dropping pieces of dumpling on the floor and laughing about it, and I looked at these two people who had almost nothing by the measures my other daughters used to count such things, and I thought, this is the wealthiest room I have been in a very long time. After Lily was in bed, Daniel sat across from me at the table with a cup of coffee, and he said, "Margaret, I want you to know that this is your home for as long as you need it to be. I know it's small. I know it's not what you're used to, but we mean that." He was not performing. He was not waiting for a response that would confirm he had said the right thing. He was simply telling me the truth. I said, "Daniel, why are you doing this?" He thought about it. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and he looked at the table for a moment, and then he said, "Because you're family, and because when my father got sick, before he passed, nobody helped us. We had to do it alone. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not you." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom after that. The next morning, I called Curtis. He arrived at 9 o'clock with a leather briefcase and the kind of quietly professional demeanor he has maintained for 2 decades. He knocked on the front door and Daniel answered it in his work clothes, confused, looking between Curtis and me. Rachel came in from the kitchen. Lily was attached to her leg. Curtis set the briefcase on that small, unsteady kitchen table, and he opened it, and he laid out the documents one by one, and then he set the check beside them. He explained in his measured way what it represented, that the estate was not frozen, that there had been no audit, that Gerald's assets had been properly managed and were entirely intact, and that I had chosen to restructure them to reflect what I had observed in the preceding months. Rachel put her hand over her mouth. Daniel looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Margaret was this." "Yes," I said. I needed to know. He was quiet. He wasn't angry. I had prepared myself for anger and found none of it. What I found instead was something more complicated, not hurt exactly, but a kind of solemn understanding, the kind that happens when someone absorbs a truth they already carried. Rachel sat down heavily in her chair and said, "Diane and Sandra." "Yes," I said. "What did they do?" I told her. I told her everything about Atlanta and the cul-de-sac and the check for $200, about Charlotte and the printed list of resources and the hug at the door. I told her all of it evenly, without editorializing, because the facts did not need embellishment. They were what they were. Rachel was crying by the time I finished. Not for herself. Rachel cries for other people. She was crying for me. I looked at Daniel and I said, "You sold your tools." He started to say something and I held up my hand. I told him that within the week he would have whatever he needed to replace every piece of equipment he had sold and then some. I told him I was putting a sum of money aside for Lily's college, fully funded, in an account in her name. I told him that the property 2 blocks from his school, the commercial space that Gerald had acquired years ago and never developed, was going to be signed over to Daniel to do with as he chose. Curtis slid the relevant page across the table. Daniel looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at me and he said, "I didn't do any of it for this." "I know," I said. "That's why." I called Diane that afternoon. I called Sandra first because Sandra is direct, and I wanted to have the direct conversation first. I told her what I had done. I told her what I had found. I did not raise my voice. I did not use dramatic language. I described her behavior, and I described Daniel's behavior, and I let her hear them side by side in the same plain sentences. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Mom, that wasn't fair. You deceived us." I said, "I did." She said, "That's not, I was just being practical. We have a lot going on. You know how much we have going on." I said, "Sandra, your father worked his whole life. We scrimped and saved and invested carefully for 40 years so that we would have something to leave behind for you and your sisters. And when I appeared at your door with nothing, you handed me a pamphlet." Another silence. I said, "I love you. I will always love you. But the inheritance will go where it is deserved, and I need you to sit with that for a while." I called Diane after. The conversation was similar, though Diane cried. And crying with Diane has always been more complicated than crying with Sandra, because Diane uses tears the way some people use armor. I listened to her cry. I said what was true, that I loved her, that I was not erasing her, that this was not a punishment but a consequence, and that consequences were sometimes the only teachers that could reach us. When I hung up, I sat in Rachel's small living room, and I listened to the house around me. Lily's drawings were taped to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets. Daniel's library book was on the coffee table, a history of the Apollo program, overdue by 3 days. There was a jar of wildflowers on the windowsill that Rachel had clearly cut from the side of the road, and they were in the last day of their beauty, the petals just beginning to soften at the edges. There is something I have not told you yet. On the first night I arrived at Rachel's house, lying in Lily's small bed, under a quilt that Rachel had made herself the winter she was pregnant, I thought about a woman I had seen outside the gas station in Charlotte. She was sitting on the concrete barrier at the edge of the parking lot, with a cardboard sign and a paper coffee cup. She looked about 60. She had on a jacket that was not warm enough for November. I had been too inside my own situation to do anything about it in the moment. I gave her the $200 check that Diane had written me, but it felt insufficient. It felt like Sandra's pamphlet. When Curtis came to Rachel's house that morning, I had him bring a second envelope. Inside, it was the deed to a small property Gerald had owned, near Charlotte, a rental house, vacant, nothing grand, but solid, maintained, with a furnace that worked and a yard with 2 oak trees. I had Curtis arrange for it to be donated to a local housing nonprofit, specifically for women over 50 experiencing housing instability. It is a small thing. It does not fix anything large. But Gerald always said that about small things. He said they added up. He said the whole architecture of a decent life was made of small things done consistently in the right direction. He said it so often that I stopped really hearing it, the way you stop hearing any voice that is always present. Now I hear it all the time. I hear it when I am at Rachel's table on Sunday afternoons, which is where I spend most of my Sunday afternoons now. I hear it when Lily climbs into my lap and demands that I tell her a story. I hear it when Daniel comes in from the garage, hands still dirty, laughing at something Rachel has just said, and the sound of it fills that small house the way light fills a room when someone opens a curtain. I sold my big house in December. I moved into a smaller place, 10 minutes from Rachel, with a garden that I am slowly learning to understand. Diane called in January. It was a real call, not the checking in kind, but a real one, the kind where you can hear that a person is trying. We talked for an hour. It was not resolved. It was a beginning, which is all a phone call can be. Sandra sent a letter. An actual letter, handwritten, 4 pages. She wrote about her father. She wrote about things I did not know. She remembered a camping trip when she was 7, a conversation they had when she was in college, a particular afternoon in our old kitchen when Gerald taught her how to make his mother's apple cake. She wrote that she was sorry, not defensively, not with conditions attached. Just the 2 words and everything behind them. I keep the letter in my desk drawer. I take it out sometimes. I do not know what Diane and Sandra will become to me. I know what they have been, and I know what they showed me. And I am old enough now to understand that people contain all of those things at once, the best and the worst, and the long, complicated middle, and that loving someone does not require you to pretend the worst parts weren't real. What I know with certainty is what I have always had, and somehow managed not to see clearly enough until a cold November night when I stood at a door in Atlanta and watched something drain out of my oldest daughter's face at the prospect of her mother needing something she could not quantify. I know that Daniel will still be at that school tomorrow at 5:30 in the morning, fixing whatever needs fixing, and at lunch he will probably sit with the kindergartners for a while, and on Saturday he will coach soccer, and in the evening he will read to Lily and then come downstairs and sit with Rachel, and none of it will make the news and none of it will look like anything in particular to anyone passing by. And I know that when I am old, truly old, when the lights start to go out one by one the way they did for Gerald, the hand that holds mine will be Rachel's, and somewhere nearby will be Daniel, and that is everything. That is, as it turns out, absolutely everything.